Hi, Gretchen.
Hello.
How are you tonight?
Very happy to be here.
I'm happy that you're happy to be here. I'm happy to be here too. So, we are sitting here in your exhibition. Beautiful. I feel surrounded by the globes. I kind of feel one with your art right now. How do you feel about it? Like,
Well, until I brought the globes here, I never got to see them like this.
wow.
Because the largest space I could see them was in my living room, and some people might have even seen on Instagram that they were all crammed into one little spot. And so it was a joy to me to see them.
Everyone that's come to visit the show has been completely blown away by the level of detail that you have in each piece, not just each globe, but like each of your drawings and mixed media pieces, the thoughtfulness of each area of Elegy for Earth. It's just absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So tell me about yourself.
You know, I was not ever thinking I was going to be an artist, and I did not visit art museums, and I didn't really know much about, let's say, contemporary art. I really didn't know about art history either. And I already had children when I got it into my head that although I was a college dropout, how about I go back to college and discover if maybe I should have been being an artist all along. And it seemed like it was almost an instant recognition of, yes, I was in the right place. But that made family, children, my husband, and my art making and everything about it developed together. And so there was no, like, there was me and then the other. It was all one journey.
How did you get your start in the art world? So we know that you didn't consider yourself an artist and you didn't go to art school originally, but then you went back.
I started as a student, and so having little children, and I didn't work at first, when I was a student. And so there wasn't a lot of wherewithal. My budget was tight. Sometimes I didn't have enough money for the next semester tuition or my supplies. And so I started entering any art exhibit that gave monetary prizes or anything like that, or I sold my work to anybody who'd buy it for definitely student prices.
Sure.
And so that got me through it. I think that there was, in my case, not a premeditated plan, because for the most part, I consider my work non-commodified. It's not made for the art market. It does not sell well, and galleries don't represent me, which gives me a ton of freedom.
Sure.
And so most of my art career has been spent in nonprofit spaces, other public-funded spaces like museums, like yourselves, where I believe you guys have some freedom in choosing your artists.
We do.
It doesn't have to be a commercially successful artist. So, and so I've been asked to do lectures, and I've given talks at conferences, but often they are very much about the research. So in a way, I sometimes feel less a part of the art world and more a part of, let's say, scientific community or
Academic.
Multidisciplinary community, speaking of the subjects that I care about that are within my art.
Sure. And the subjects that are in your art, just somewhat of like the process. So you said as a student, you didn't have that much money. So I think you became, what would be the word? Very adventurous when it came to finding media to use. So.
Right. Some of that was, I don't know the background, but it could have been from making crafty things with the kids, like, hey, Mom, I need to make a volcano before tomorrow, and it's like you're looking around your house, what kind of scraps do I have to make a volcano? And so that kind of mentality, not necessarily premeditatedly, just sort of naturally flew out of me. Like, I knew about what craft stores carried, I knew about using found objects, I wasn't afraid to go outside the box. And so kind of the journey through how I got here is not knowing the destination. So for instance, as a student, and this is fairly common when you're an art student in a college atmosphere, is to first explore yourself, because you can't really understand even how to address something else if you're not first addressing who you are. So there was various types of self-portraiture. Some of my self-portraiture was placing certain animals in, but not necessarily about themselves, very symbolic to who I thought I was. And I don't remember putting any bats in, but snakes are another one that I think are frequently maligned animals that are beautiful. They're powerfully potent in mythic language. I don't know if you guys could pick it out, but there's definitely some Australian Aboriginal things I'm influenced by. The closest thing to being influenced by Western art is almost all of the Anthropocene series is jumping off compositions by Salvador Dali.
Yes.
Sometimes kind of almost confrontationally, like, okay, you did this, but now I'm going to do that with you.
Sure. So you created this in 2020, a lot of your pieces from this series, correct?
Well, three of them.
Three of them.
The original one goes back a few years,
Sure.
and it was born out of the idea. It was suggested to me to be in an exhibition where everybody was jumping off of a Salvador Dali. I was actually quite resistant to the idea and said, I'm not connected to it, let me not do it. But once I did it and then spoke in the language I speak in, which is environmental issues, of course, backed with tons of research, I felt like surrealism almost was the best way to speak of these contradictions, the contradictions that does lead us to the piñata, which is, why would we batter our own home?
The clocks, you have a lot. And when we had discussed that piece, when we did that little walkthrough, and I had a group that we were doing a tour, and they had asked, they saw the highways, they saw the interactions, and they saw each of the clocks, and they were fascinated by the work. I mean, if you just talk about like the materials that you used, the graph paper that was your father's, and the reuse of materials and that's a constant in all of your work. But those clocks in particular, I sit there and I just stare at them, because I think that the detail in your work and each of these pieces, how they have a little bit of the same but they're different.
Right. I was influenced by, or not so much influenced, but kind of given personal permission to do something when the South African artist William Kentridge was asked about how did he choose certain objects in his drawings that were potently symbolic of something, but nothing about what their origins were. He was just finding them, and he would talk about being stuck and then going to get a coffee, and then realizing the plunger coffee pot he had in his kitchen was perfect for this, how to get from one image to another. And so those watches I inherited from my husband's grandfather, and all of them are broken. And so it was, to me, amazing that somebody could have such a huge collection of broken watches. But the idea of broken time that isn't quite right, so they're placed as close to on the clock as they can be, but I didn't change the time of them.
A lot of the pieces are a direct relation to your personal experience.
Right, so that means, in a way, one could argue pretty strongly that no matter what I'm talking about in here, it's all somewhat self-portraiture. There's many, many layers to anything you do artistically, but, I don't know if this is universal or my generation, but I was raised with a globe in the house.
Yeah.
And so to me, this globe has this kind of warm and fuzzy memory to me of something very recognizable that has kind of extra value. I just felt like even touching that globe when I was a child was like magical to me. The largest one is made out of my coffee filters, which I'm directly saying, yes, look, I make so much trash just on my coffee filters alone that I have this endless supply of coffee filters. And I only drink 1 cup of coffee a day, so it's not like, but it always makes me highly aware of my own output of reusable paper trash, that because I save the paper stuff, it also makes me, I have not used plastics for the most part in my art, but it makes me aware of that. So more and more I'm trying to eliminate as much plastic out of my life. One exception is during COVID, tons of my appliances died. And, you know, being sequestered in your house is bad enough, but if nothing's working, like your oven's not working, it got really bad. So, you know, you get online, you order whatever they'll send to you. And so suddenly I had a bunch of styrofoam from
The packaging.
of these appliances that normally when you have the guy come and install it, they haul it away and you kind of feel innocent, like I don't have anything to do with it. But I had the styrofoam, and so that's what created the elephant tusks. I felt like, okay, what to do with styrofoam?
For sure, definitely.
But then it's covered with coffee filters and other paper,
Yeah.
just random papers in my studio.
Yeah, that was a fun little tidbit when I did one tour. I go, you know, these are all made with coffee filters or covered in coffee filters. And everyone's like, how much coffee does she drink?
Well, it's one pot a day is all we make in my house. You know, I also use, if there's leftover coffee, you guys probably recognize in these drawings, there's coffee all over the place, and it'll be in the,
Yeah.
you know, the media.
Well, I remember with your piece that you were telling me that you actually made that rust color.
Oh, I made the rusting,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, you made the rust and you used that as
Rusty
an ink.
nails and
Yeah.
vinegar.
And exactly, I thought that was so cool. I was like, this is the best, you know,
And
because
also the Statue of Liberty is
it's patinaed, you told me. Yeah.
copper, just copper pieces. So I actually use sometimes, I don't know what to call it because I call it steel wool in the kitchen.
Sure.
But it's copper thingy that isn't steel wool. But you know, they get really nasty after a while. We try to wash it and keep it going. So then it goes out to the studio and gets stuck in vinegar to make beautiful. And it's never it's always that turquoise, but it can be opaque and creamy, or it can be clear. Like, it's really a variety of, depending on what copper you use.
What other materials do you use?
It's
for your
almost
work?
anything, you know. Like, I spend a lot of time telling students to do this too. Like, if you get any kind of pad of paper, sometimes that back cardboard is really stiff.
Yeah,
Like,
Matt, I took a piece of one of those back cardboards and I was like, this is perfect to mat a paper on it. And I went ahead and I did that. And we're very resourceful, you know. Artists are resourceful in that way.
but sometimes it's my own waste, because like for the Anthropocene series particularly, but for some other pieces that are not in the show, I will have tons of outlines and images and sketches, and I like to work on tracing paper so that I can then sometimes take it and put it with something else real quick, or other reasons to do that. And so this large map behind you, Terra Ephemera, is, I realized, I suddenly became aware, like, what would happen if, you know, let's say I weren't around tomorrow, and I've saved every single tracing I ever did from anything. And it seemed like very precious to me. But I thought, but really, where's it going to go? And so I thought, I'm going to start using it up. So quite a bit was used up in the globes, and then quite a bit was used up in there, which leads to the fun for me, I don't know about anybody else, to find the things in there that exist in other things. Like, you know, it's like, where's
We
Waldo?
talked about the cats.
The cats.
You have the cats.
Some of that is actually cannibalized old drawings. Like, you know, in that more mythic imagery, self-portraiture, family stories, the cats and the reaching arms, the young girl, the birds, the heart, that is all really old imagery, sometimes done, like the birds are done on textured paper, and I learned to not really like to draw on textured paper, so it sat around kind of.
Yeah. I think it's this piece, Terra Ephemera, for me is probably the most, after speaking to you about it, is the most in relation to yourself, because you said that there's just so many pieces of work that you've made in the past, things that were given to you, things that were a part of one piece and you didn't like it, so you cut it out and then you created a mirror of it to really bring it together. Over the years, you know, you're not just talking about, I did this in the last, you know, year or so. how far back do you think you have these pieces? I mean, you have the
I
charts
don't know, my
that were your
career is,
father's.
at this point where it seems like I'm not quite 20 years out of graduate school, so it doesn't fit,
Sure.
what seems like should be the truth. But some would go back to even those years of undergraduate.
Yeah, your use of collage in there is just, it's really creative because it feels like it was made for this piece. And then when you find out that these are pieces that you've had, that it's telling a whole story. You told me, this friend gave this to me and he passed away.
Right.
And you have memories of all these people in your piece. And this piece is massive. We're talking, it's 12, it's got to be 12 feet, maybe? No, it's got 10 feet by 10 feet. It's huge.
You're speaking of, the one I was talking about was Fred Kernberg. I needed an image of a white domestic cat because I wanted it to have no markings on it that would make it be mistaken for a wild cat in a different drawing altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So, I work up my sketch on tracing paper, and that cat was used, in another drawing. When I was doing this, I found, the large cat outline, and I decided, in thinking deeply about my dear friend, who is very much alive in the fact that he influences me all the time, but I put the cat up in the sun, but it was just a pencil line, and I thought, oh darn, I can't really see it good enough. I want that cat to stand out. So the original cat was white, so I took a little gouache and just, just put a little bit of edging.
So let's get into a little bit more of this exhibition in particular. How long did it take you to develop and know what you were going to show?
Well, I was trying to remember when Jill contacted me, because we met in this space, and she talked about, you have this space, you can do something monumental. And the first thing I noticed that you only had that one tall wall, and I had just come off a series of 3 9x9 large collages that were much more premeditated with a few sustainable purchased materials. And I thought, well, I don't want to put one of the ones I already made. So that came into my head almost simultaneously as when I was thinking about what do I want to do with this space. And I probably originally would have thought of something larger and busier.
Mm-hmm.
But I had come to almost a crisis in these Anthropocene drawings in the fact that I was talking about very detailed things in the Anthropocene, and it was building up topics, and I was becoming more and more aware of my part in this world. And so all of a sudden I realized that the only answer was the world, the globe.
Yeah.
And I was also really going off on a tangent on this idea that is involved with the piñata. The piñata is filled with purchased, used things.
Yep.
Okay?
And
So
they range in years.
yeah. So I was already of this mindset that in the olden days, you'd live in a smaller community and there might be a more bartering going on, but there might be selling, like a woman might sell her the grease from her kitchen to the grease buying guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were all these forms of reusing work, of materials, but there was often this person, a bricoleur, who would take stuff that was no longer functioning, but then there would be a new thing needed, and so that those things would be made either using multiples or the same thing to create something new. And once I had the idea of globes, I thought, since I didn't want to actually put maps or anything on them that would lock them down in time period, lock them down in politics, lock them down in anything else, but I still wanted you guys to think of them as Earth,
Mm-hmm.
so they needed to be on that proper diagonal. But also, my mind's eye thought that globes belonged on tripods. And then I realized that surveying equipment and cameras from the olden days, these are ways to look at the earth. You know, if you have a wooden tripod from old time cameras, you're most likely out in the field, and some of them were distinctly for out in the field.
Sure.
But definitely the surveying tripods are for out in the field to measure the earth, and I thought that just brought another layer to the story. The meridians were probably more difficult than they should be because I was determined to not buy any material. So even if we had to glue together any boards we happen to have around to then cut it out,
Yeah.
and then how many can you get out of here?
Yeah.
So there were issues. The large one was a salvaged butcher block like countertop, and after the meridian was cut, the butcher block countertop was falling to pieces. And we're like, oh, great. So it has all sorts of screws and glue, like it's put together with all sorts, like, a little bit of spit. Not really, but it was like,
Blood, sweat, and tears.
because it was like we were never going to get something that big again that we happened to already have. We were digging through, the garage,
Oh, yeah.
any corner. What can we like salvage or cannibalize or recreate?
I think they're interesting too because when you look at it, straight on, it looks very sturdy, and then you get down to the points at the very bottom, and it's just so delicate. One little push could throw it off its axis, if you will. But I absolutely adore looking at all of them. And I remember when you were unpacking them and you had them all lined up, you knew exactly which one went where, just the amount of detail that went into that, the work in general, the installation, the creation, and the fact that you were so set on using what you had and not purchasing. Who's helped you along the way in making your art? Who's been your supporter, your number one cheerleader, if you will?
Well, like I said, my whole family. So when the kids were still in the house,
Yeah.
I think maybe they weren't so happy. I mean, they were happy and not happy, but man, if I had a major project, they were my labor source. But my husband helped me from the very start, even while I was a student, and I got a little pushback from that, even though it's very common for contemporary artists to have art
Studio
assistants,
exactly.
hire a carpenter, all sorts of things. And so I thought it was a little bit of a bias that because this guy I had, spent years of my life with, somehow he wasn't viable. But it was brief, he would help me here and there. But in the last few years, and particularly with these final projects, I think Robert, my husband, who is here, is now my art assistant, because now I discuss even aesthetic choices with him. It's rare for me to find anybody who I feel safe discussing that, because people try to make you make the art they think your art should be,
Sure.
instead of actually helping you to realize your vision.
Or understand your vision.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'm lucky about that.
Very lucky. I think that's very noble.
Although I do have to purchase the old
Of
tripods.
course. So it's great.
At some point, these were in the front yard, like we're working on them outside, and it causes quite a sensation in the neighborhood. But some of the outside work, which is, making the meridians and getting them on there, sometimes I would leave Robert to go do something else, like work on the other thing or make a different globe. And so I think to the neighbors, like, Robert made the, they're his alone.
But he knows that they're yours, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, well, I think they're ours.
Yeah.
If you talk to my cats, I think they think they're theirs. Because I have 3 cats in the house, but one is a feral. I think I told you about
Yes.
this. I've had her for 4 years, but she's still as wild as the day I brought her in the house. When the tripods were all set up in the living room, like, have you ever seen the movie Secondhand Lion?
I have not.
Okay, it's a fabulous movie, and there's this broken down lion that lives in a cornfield, and it thinks it's its whole jungle. And my little feral cat just, for the whole time the tripods were in the living room, just lived in among the tripods.
gosh.
And so we're like, oh, you're in your forest, we won't disturb you. It was part of the contract with my husband, if you marry me, you gotta like care about these same subjects. And so he's been on board from the start. We've been married
Awesome.
since the 1st century BC. Kind of literally.
Yeah, but that's great. Gretchen, this talk, I mean, it illuminated me because I already had the pleasure of walking the space with you and really talking about each piece. But I do think that it helped our guests really understand your work, and your process and what goes on in your brain, which is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope that our performance piece, your performance piece, that will be taking place on the 22nd, which we will be filming and it will be posted. I'm very excited for that. Like that is all I can really put into words. I'm very excited to see how this plays out.
Very good. And thank all of you for being here. It's nice with this foul weather that you actually came out to attend an artist talk, and my friends who drove as far as I did.
Thank you again, Gretchen.
Thank you.